The idea of human nature has been pretty central to my thinking for, it's 53 years now since I first got an idea about forces independent of human nature that get unleashed with the rise of civilization. Uh, Having pursued that work in various different dimensions for, half a century now, I feel uh, that I can say I can prove that the ugliness we see in human nature is not in human history is not human nature writ large. That there's a social evolutionary force that emerges. It's independent of human nature, and that's why I also claim to be able to prove that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that embarks upon the path of civilization, which means it extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life, will inevitably unleash a social evolutionary force that it didn't invite, it didn't choose, but it could not avoid, and which turns out to be, in some important ways, a very destructive force. So, human nature is something that I think is important for us to get clearer on, and I feel like I got something to offer in that respect. And to basically that by showing the social evolutionary force that puts a spirit of the gangster in a disproportionate voice in shaping the future, that by doing that, stepping onto the path of civilization. Uh, uh, Makes the human world look like something very different from human nature. So I think I can show that. And then to illustrate how to think about what we see in the world and in our history, and how that relates to what we by nature are. Uh, I'd like to tell the story about a piece of research. It's troubling to read about now, but it was allowed back in the 1950s when a psychologist at Wisconsin named Harlow uh, did some experiments with rhesus monkeys that people were talking about a lot for the years when I was getting educated in the 60s. In this experiment, the scientists created two groups of newborn rhesus monkeys, um, taken from their mothers, I guess right away. I don't remember details, and and set up with either of two arrangements. No rhesus monkeys, but two different kinds of sort of uh, mock-up monkeys that would provide them the food for a newborn primate mammal. Um, but one of them was covered in a cozy fabric, and one of them was just a wire mesh cage with nothing covered to snuggle up against. So he had these two different groups, and other than the difference between those two artificial whatevers, uh, everything was done exactly the same. And so when the two groups turn out very differently, uh, it can be inferred that the differences between them are a result of the difference in the experience they had being newborns and growing up a bit with a mother you can cuddle with or one that you can't. Just the cuddling alone was enough to make huge differences. The ones that had the cuddleable fabric around the wire or mesh, uh, as I recall, they developed into basically normal um, rhesus monkeys. Were able to live and function in a rhesus group, but not the ones that had nothing to cuddle with. The wire mesh group uh, couldn't function in relationship with other monkeys. They couldn't function to be part of a mating pair. Pretty fundamental stuff. Now, what I want to use that to show is that when you talk about the nature of a creature, you're not just talking about genes, because especially creatures like us, even more than rhesus monkeys, we are born in an organism that is prudently um, expecting to find itself in a situation in which its needs will be more or less met sufficiently to realize the nature of that that's been selected for as good at getting his DNA into the future. So there's an unfinishedness to the extent to which a given species is into learning. I mean, I suppose that when various kinds of things hatch, in huge numbers, there is no great developmental requirement. I guess, all the eggs of fish that hatch and all they need to complete themselves is there they are in the water. But that's not how it is with a rhesus monkey, and it's not how it is with human beings. We are born into as an organism that's ready to be completed by the kinds of forces that were in the reliable environment into which our ancestors were born. And the 98% or 90, whatever you want to figure things, the overwhelming majority of our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers. Civilization has been around for, what are we talking about, 500 generations of different stages of it. But it's still a very recent thing compared to all those generations of our being. I'll go back to primate groups, and then the hominid predecessors, and on into now Homo sapiens, and with our admixtures of Neanderthal and I'm suddenly blocking on that name, Denisovan ancestry. All these countless generations, almost. That was the environment that we were born into, and we were prepared for a lot of flexibility about how we would be completed, but within certain parameters that are set by the fact that it was hunting gathering groups, and however cultured, we're living basically continuously with how we had in the primate past. So there was a general continuous correspondence between what we required to complete ourselves in human nature, and what we would find. But with the added diversity that comes with culture, that we're born ready to be finished, like with whatever language our cultural group speaks. But in the 10,000 years since the breakthrough started in our extricating ourselves from our old biological niche, we have created a very different world from the one that we evolved in. And so we aren't, I'm not going to say that we're in the position of being so profoundly deprived of a good match to us by our environment, like the rhesus monkeys with the wire cage mothers. I'm not going to say it goes that far. Um, though there are some hair-raising stories about what cultures have done to people and why. But in any event, I say that the civilized societies that have developed, inevitably developed, in which human needs played only a partial role in shaping it, and the demands of power, which is basically my what I claim to show, uh, are are the only kind that can survive and spread in the new disordered situation, the anarchy, the war of all against all. Anyway, that's the way the thing goes. There's an inevitability about the selection for the ways of power. And so, in some ways, there's going to be a war that goes on between the demands of power and the demands of human needs. There will be some correspondences, but there will be major conflicts. And so, we are growing up in a culture which I would say probably pretty universally for the last 5,000 years is less well matched to meeting the needs of human nature and expressing basic human nature than the average hunting gathering society. And there were diversity of them all over the planet before civilization ever began. Now, I don't claim to have the evidence to prove it. I am deducing it from what I think has been going on. And the war of all against all and the selection for power that's inevitable and the spirit of the gangster that gets a disproportionate say on how civilization will develop, all that seems to me to be profound enough that there is inevitably going to be a seriously problematic aspect to how civilization is, that it is enough like the wire mesh mother that we can infer that what we see around us isn't human nature writ large, isn't an accurate picture of us any more than those pathetic wire meshed mother raised rhesus monkeys that couldn't function in a rhesus group, couldn't produce rhesus offspring because they didn't know how to have a successful mating relationship, any more than they reveal what rhesus monkey nature is. Human nature isn't a single thing, but I expect that we would see in the diversity of cultural faces that humankind had before we unleashed this force would be a better picture of who and what we are. And I can't, even though I've paid a lot of attention to this, I can't claim that I'm real clear on what the picture is that emerges. But I am clear that I can show that we are better creatures than our history shows us to be. And I think that's important to know. And that we should have some compassion for ourselves, just like those poor rhesus monkeys, if they understood what had been done to them. And like I said, I don't think anybody would be allowed to do that now. If they understood what had been done to them, they would have compassion for themselves in their incapacity to function like good, well put together, healthy rhesus monkeys. Well, I think that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. And that can encourage us to imagine that we can build a better world than we have understood ourselves to be capable of doing. I think we need to think of our nature as that which would express itself, what the human world would look like if people really got to choose freely whether the world would be at war or at peace, whether it be more permeated by love and less permeated by hate, whether it be more justice or less justice, whether it be more human fulfillment or less. If we could understand that that is the world that we would like to create, that might also empower us to consider what do we have to do to be able to create such a world? And the answer is to overcome the forces that we've unleashed, to recognize that what we see around us is not human nature writ large, but has been rendered uglier, more destructive, more tormented by the fact that we have not controlled the evolution of civilization nearly enough, because there are other forces that get of a systemic nature that have been unleashed. And if you want to see if I can show those things, I hope you'll go to abetterhumanstory.org, where it will be laid out as many times and as many ways as you would want to know. And I think I show that these things are true. Thank you.